Hi, I'm Shalane from TSC Tuition, and today I thought we could react to Anthony Albanese's victory speech after the election as if it were a crafting texts piece. For context, TSC Tuition is a team of English tutors specializing in one-to-one English tutoring for all Victorian high school students. So if you are looking for one-to-one English tutoring, contact us and let's get one of our tutors working with you. But in the meantime, let's have a look at Anthony Albanese's speech as if he were a high school student. Now, for context, I haven't really watched the whole speech yet, so I've heard snippets of it on the radio because I'm old. Um, but let's watch it together.
My fellow Australians.
I think that's really interesting that he starts the speech with my fellow Australians because he's clearly in a room full of people, and so it would make sense that he addresses the people in the room with him. But obviously, like my fellow Australians does include all the people in the room, but I think knowing that this speech will be recorded, it'll be televised, it'll be broadcasted across the whole nation, he's also addressing the entire nation as well. He's talking to all Australians, regardless of who they voted for or whether they voted at all. So it is very important in your crafting and creating texts piece that you have a very explicitly defined audience for yourself, just so you can use vocabulary and stylistic choices that are appropriate for that audience.
Serving as your Prime Minister is the greatest honour of my life.
I think it's also good to note that in your crafting creating texts piece, you have to hit one of the four purposes, or at least one of the four purposes, and that is to express, explain, argue, and reflect. And I think him starting with that sentence that, he's expressing, right, very clearly that he's very appreciative, that he's very humbled, he's possibly a little bit overwhelmed, he looks quite emotional there. Um, with what has just happened. And I think it's going to be fairly clear that in this speech, there's going to be a lot of expressing. There's going to be a lot of expressing of his feelings and emotions and his attitude towards this um, election victory. But also, I think expressing the position, right, of the party and what he's going to do as prime minister.
And it is with a deep sense of humility and a profound sense of responsibility that the first thing that I do tonight is to say thank you to the people of Australia for the chance to continue to serve the best nation on earth.
I think those two words that he's used there, I think it was humility and responsibility. They're quite formal words and they're quite somber words as well. And one could reasonably expect someone who's just won the election in a landslide, it's quite historic, that he would feel very jubilant, right? Very ecstatic, like over the moon about what has just happened, but he's not. He's using vocabulary that is not expressing that. Instead, it's expressing this sort of very humble, very serious attitude and perspective towards what has just happened. So if we were looking at this as a student piece, we would make comments, right, about, oh, you've really used these stylistic choices to create this voice of humility, there we go, and this serious voice and serious tone about uh, about what's just happened, and it gives the speaker this character as well, that he's not like a hoorah kind of we did it, yes we did kind of personality, but rather a more responsible, mature adult kind of character.
And I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging today and every day.
think it is the acknowledgement to of Aboriginal elders is pretty stock standard. The wording is very common across multiple settings. What's different is the last phrase, today and every day. Now, that and every day is an extra addition to what is commonly said, and the inclusion of that in the speech then gives, I think, more force to that purpose of expression. And now I think really um, more force to that expression of persuading, right? Persuading the audience that this is important, and that this is what he stands for, and that this is what the Labour Party stands for. Now, whether or not you agree with it or not, it's irrelevant. But if we're looking at the stylistic choices and the inclusion of that phrase, it's very much in that purpose of expressing and persuading.
Today, the Australian people have voted for Australian values.
Now, that is a declarative statement. It's not a question. It's a declaration of a fact, right? If you're an English language student, you would pick up on that very broad Australian accent. Australian. It's very wide. It's very broad. Um, and it might be his normal accent, but there is a definite emphasis on that vowel there. But we're not doing English language. We're looking at crafting and creating texts. So if we think about that statement, it is there to, I think, again, express, right, that the Labor Party stands for Australian values, and it's implicitly there. He's not saying that the Labor Party represents Australian values. He's not saying that, but it's implied that because they won, Labor Party stands for Australian values.
For fairness, aspiration and opportunity for all. For the strength to show courage in adversity and kindness to those in need.
I think it's good also to note that there is a repetition of four there. So there's three sets of fours, right, for Australian values, and then another four, I think it was for aspiration and something else, and then for courage in adversity and kindness to others. So there are three sets of fours there, and it um, creates this voice of this rolling, it's almost like a rolling expression of ideas. Oh, it's like a dot point, and it creates this voice of certainty. I think it creates a voice that sort of says, he's considered this, he's thought about this, that's why there are so many of these dot points, and it contributes to that um, expression, and now I think an explanation, right, of what the Labor Party stands for and what therefore the people have voted for. So we're ticking a few purposes here, just in those three fours.
Australians have voted for a future that holds true to these values, a future built on everything that brings us together as Australians and everything that sets our nation apart from the world.
Again, he is making declarative statements about what Australians have chosen. It's interesting that he's not saying it from the other way around, right? He's saying, he could have said, we stand for X, Y, and Z, and that's why people have voted for us. He's sort of left the party out of it, actually. He's not really mentioned the Labor Party at all. Instead, he's making all of these declarative statements about what the Australian people have chosen, and since the Labor Party is what the people have chosen, therefore the Labor Party is all of these things that people have chosen. It's a very interesting choice of statements and sentences, really, in this speech, because it puts the focus on Australian people and it takes away the focus from what the Labor Party did or have done or will have promised to do. It's taken the Labor Party out of that equation, and instead it's very much about um, Australian people and what Australian people value. And if we think about the purposes, the four allowed purposes of the crafting, creating text SAC, we have express, explain, reflect, and persuade. I think here there is a lot of expression. There's, I think, a little bit of explanation, but the explanation is tied up in the persuasion as well. It is persuading implicitly, right? These are statements that few Australians will be able to argue against. That I don't think, it's very hard to say that no Australians don't stand for fairness, for example, or that no Australians don't stand for equal opportunity. Like these are positive things that we generalize and assume that all Australians value. And by saying these statements, he is then implicitly persuasive, right? In that because the Labor Party has won, therefore the Labor Party is all of these things that Australian people value. And it's very cleverly done, actually, because he hasn't mentioned the Labor Party at all, um, which you would think he would because they've just won. It would make perfect sense to say the Labor Party is great, the Labor Party is this and that. We're fantastic. That's why the people voted for us. But he hasn't said that, and he's put the focus back instead on the Australian population as a whole.
Australians have chosen to face global challenges the Australian way, looking after each other while building for the future. And to serve these values, meet these challenges, seize these opportunities.
I think the repetition of these is very interesting. These values, he repeats that, I think, 3 times, and obviously the these refer to what he said previously. And that repetition is very forceful. It positions his voice as a forceful, strong personality or character, and it creates this persona of someone who really knows what he wants and is out to get it, and he's got it, and it creates this character that is quite strong, and the voice is very strong because of that repetition. So if you are doing your crafting or creating texts and you're trying to create this voice that is a little bit more forceful, a little bit more strong, a repetition of words like these in reference to something that you've said earlier could be helpful.
Now, at election time, parties and candidates ask people to make a choice. And inevitably, the campaign and the coverage is about our differences and our disagreements. That is the nature of our democracy, and it is the role of the media who serve it.
So there's a lot of explanation going on there. He's explaining what's happened. He's explaining that this is the nature of democracy. So it's ticking off that box in terms of the purposes.
But now that the Australian people have made their clear choice, let us all reflect on what we have in common. Because no matter who you voted for, no matter where you live,
now, again, he's now addressing the wider population of Australia because he said no matter who you voted for, he's talking to a room full of Labor supporters and the party faithful, and these are people who have obviously voted for Labor because he's not talking to them. He's not talking to just the people who voted for Labor. He's talking to all Australians. So there he's cementing that the identity of his audience here, that it is all Australians regardless of who they voted for.
No matter how you worship or who you love, whether you belong to a culture that has known and cared for this great continent for 65,000 years, or you have chosen our nation as your home and enriched our society with your contribution, we are all Australians.
I think it's great to note here that again he's got this dot point, right? This rolling list of all the people that he could be addressing here. And again, having that very long rolling list of, dot points makes him sound considered. It makes him sound like he's thought about it. He's smart and intelligent because he's understanding all of these nuanced identities of who could, have voted. And it contributes to that character of him as a smart, intelligent person who has considered widely all the people in Australia.
So let all of us work together to build our national unity on the enduring foundations of fairness, equality, and respect for one another.
And here we have a persuasive point, right? It is, if we look at the purposes, he's not actively persuading, he's not explicitly saying, these are the reasons that we should do X, Y, and Z, but he does start the sentence with, so let us, right, to and do all of these things. And the "so let us" builds on top of the previous arguments, right, of everything that he said about, everyone being Australian, and that, all the things about equality and fairness and, being kind to one another, things like that. So it builds on top of all of those little implicit arguments or points. And then he ends with this almost a call to action, right? So let us do X, Y, and Z. So that is a persuasive point, and if we were to look at it very carefully through a crafting text perspective, that would be a phrase that you would pick up on when you're writing your commentary.
My fellow Australians, I know the world has thrown a lot at our country over the past 3 years. I know so many of you have worked hard in the face of significant challenges, and I know there's still much more to do to help people under pressure.
Again, he's repeated the "I know, I know, I know," and it's interesting here to note that he starts with the first two "I knows" are sort of factual statements, and then the third "I know" is about the future. So he's building using that triplet, right, of repetition to move the concept forward. It's not just a recap, right, of what's happened so far. It's not a recap of what's led up to this point, but it's also a projection of, we have so much to do, let's do it together, blah, blah, blah. And that rhythm, repetition, that triplet of the "I knows" help to move that forward. It creates that rhythm. And again, that's something that you would talk about in your commentary if this is a speech that you wrote.
So much that in these uncertain times, the people of Australia have placed their trust in Labor once again.
This is, I think, the first time that he's mentioned the word Labor or the name Labor, and he's quite far into his speech now. So I think that's very interesting to note that he has spent all of this time explaining, expressing, and persuading, right? All of these Australian values are implicitly Labor. And then once he's sort of established that, then he drops the word Labor. And I think that's an interesting stylistic choice, and it contributes to that voice of, that this is a strong character, that he is an inclusive character as well. He hasn't used very divisive language yet. He hasn't used sort of like very inclusive or exclusive language. He hasn't sort of talked a lot about us and thems and, very divisive language like that. So that's an interesting stylistic choice, I think.
I make this solemn pledge. We will not forget that. We will never take it for granted. Repaying your trust will drive our government each and every day of the next 3 years. The positive program we took to this election was shaped by the Australian people's priorities, and our government will dedicate the next 3 years to making a positive difference to your lives and to your future, bringing the rewards for your hard work within reach, investing in our youngest Australians, looking after older Australians.
It's fascinating, actually, that I think this is the first very long sentence that sort of doesn't hit. And I think it's because he's not saying that as himself. He's not saying that with his own voice. This is a party crafted line about this is what the Labor Party will do, this is what our government will do, in the next 3 years. And it's very much a crafted line, but it's not in his voice. And that's fascinating. I want to listen to that again.
I make this solemn pledge. We will not forget that. We will never take it for granted.
And that repetition here, the we will not, we will never, that repetition of that phrase is again so strong. And then it's immediately followed by this very blur kind of line.
Repaying your trust will drive our government each and every day of the next 3 years. The positive program we took to this election was shaped by the Australian people's priorities.
And like just that line there is it's very meh. It sort of doesn't say a lot. It's not in his voice, and it's not in his voice because the language choices there, like the positive program, like what does that mean? Up to now, he's used very clear, precise language, and that phrase, positive program, sort of doesn't mean anything.
And our government will dedicate the next 3 years to making a positive difference to your lives and to your future, bringing the rewards for your hard work within reach.
Having that line there where it's a little bit more chopped up, it's in more colloquial language, your hard work, your efforts, all of that sort of is a little bit closer, I think, to his voice, but because that rides on the back of that earlier phrase, positive program into the election, whatever that means, is it detracts from it. It's not built on a strong voice. And so regardless of how little snappy phrases there are, it doesn't really hit true because it's not in his voice. So the lesson here, I think, for crafting, creating texts pieces is that it has to be in a very authentic voice that is consistent throughout the piece.
We take up this task with new hope, new confidence and new determination.
And see how once he's sort of like gotten out that line that's probably been crafted for him about what the government's going to do, he is now so much more authentic in saying what he says in, the newness of everything. And again, I think that is a lesson for all year 11 and 12 students doing their crafting, creating texts piece, that the voice needs to be consistent, because as soon as it falters, as soon as you write something that you think, oh, I should write X, Y, and Z because, it feels like it's necessary, that needs to be revised, because it's very clear when something is not in your voice.
With no one held back and no one left behind.
And again, there's a lot of repetition there. No one. It creates this forceful personality and voice in this speech, and that I think has been really consistent from beginning to end. There's a lot of repetition of these phrases, and that's helpful if you're doing a speech because everybody's listening. And repetition is helpful to people retaining the message, but it also creates this forceful personality that is very consistent, except for that little stumble in the middle throughout the speech.
Because when we look at everything going on around the world today, when we consider the changes that will shape the future of the global economy, when we think about our people and their smarts and...
Again, that repetition of when we creates that voice.
We have everything we need to seize this moment and make it our own. And we must do it together, all of us, because for Australia to realise our full potential.
He's used the word we a few times there, and it's not always we as in all Australians, we. sometimes he's using the we as we here in the room or we the Labour Party. And then other times he's saying we all Australians. So it is important to differentiate that in your speech or in your crafting texts piece. It is important to really be very, very clear on who your audience is and then use those inclusive pronouns appropriately. And if you are doing your persuasive speech or if you're doing argument analysis, it's very important that you identify who exactly that we is.
Every Australian must have the opportunity to be their best. To serve our Australian values, we must value every Australian, and Labor will govern for every Australian.
There's a lot of everys in this list of inclusions. And now that I think about it, that line about that sort of like falls flat a bit because it's like a party line. That line doesn't work because it doesn't have that repetition. It doesn't have the repetition of the phrase, and it also doesn't have the repetition of all of those rolling dot points. Um, and so it's very different in tone and style to the rest of the speech where he is speaking in a way more authentic voice. So I hope you found that a helpful exercise to go through the speech from a crafting and creating texts angle. Do follow us on all of our social media channels for more videos like this or for other content that we might post. We are on Facebook, Instagram, sometimes on TikTok, and of course YouTube. So make sure you like and subscribe to all of our things so you don't miss out on what we post. And again, if you are looking for one-to-one English tutoring for your teen or for yourself, please contact us and let's get one of our tutors working with you. That's it from me. Thanks for watching.